I think it's just it's just a couple of minutes past 6 now, isn't it? So I don't know if you're going to start the presentation and then pass across to me to represent Louisiana's work. So,
yeah, do you want me to?
I think so, and I know there's still a few people coming in, but for the sake of being fairly late on a Friday, it's as good a time as any to start, and then we'll run the presentation and then open up for discussion.
Okay. Right, good evening, everybody. My name's Dave Arnott, and I'm the Farming and Protected Landscapes Officer at the North York Moors National Park. Just a few points on admin just before we start. You'll notice on the toolbar there's a question and answer box. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just type them in there, and then you can vote for your favourite questions in there, and they'll rise to the top of the agenda. And we'll address all questions, and we'll have an open discussion questions at the end of the discussion. So as I say, my name is Dave Arnott, and I'm the Farming and Protected Landscapes Officer in the North York Moors National Park. We're here tonight to talk to you about nature-based solutions in protected areas. And this particular focus is on the North York Moors National Park. So where does the park lie? The North York Moors National Park lies approximately 20 miles to the northeast of the city of York and extends to the southern fringe of the Tees Valley. It's home to 554 square miles of what we think is stunning and diverse landscapes, and it includes 26 miles of outstanding coastline. And to the north east of the national park, you have the popular coastal town of Whitby, and to the southeast of the national park, you have Scarborough. And these are the most populous centres around the national park from which people can enter. The national park itself is home to approximately 23,000 residents who contribute to the culture, community, economy, and the upkeep of the national park. So what's my aim tonight? Well, my aim tonight is to give you a brief insight into some of the programmes that are delivering nature-based solutions in the North York Moors National Park. I'll also introduce you to the DEFRA-funded Farming and Protected Landscapes programme, which is the programme that I run on behalf of DEFRA within the National Park. The first programme I want to introduce you to is Revitalise. Now, Revitalise is one of the largest programmes that we have in the National Park delivering nature-based solutions. It's a £3.4 million landscape partnership scheme, which involves 15 partners. And the map that you can see here, you can see it sits on the western side of the National Park, and it runs down through the National Park and down into the Hawardian Hills and the Owen. So it covers 2 protected landscapes. And this is the River Rye catchment area. The delivery phase for the programme has been running from 2019, and it's running until 2025. And the main aims of this programme is to conserve, enhance, and restore the River Rye catchment area. And it involves, at the moment, 19 programmes. And these programmes are broken down into 2 main areas: the water quality and the environment. And it involves a number of different programmes. The first one is about habitat restoration and water quality. So this is in the riparian zone around the river. We're looking to fence off and create riparian habitats. We're looking to improve the water quality within the River Rye and the tributaries coming in and running into the River Rye. They're looking to create a more natural river. So taking out boundaries and barriers to the flow of the river, looking at sort of configuring the river so that the river flows in a more natural way. They have a small and tall project which focuses on the Rye's bats and its ancient trees. And I'll talk a little bit more about where citizen science comes in a little bit later. We have white-clawed crayfish in the River Rye, but they're threatened by American signal crayfish. So there is a program there to try and save the white-clawed crayfish. The Wood of Wonder project is looking to restore the River Rye's ancient woodland, to manage it in a better way, and to make sure that it's there for generations going forward. But as everywhere, there is massive problems with invasive non-native species. And a lot of the time in the River Rye is focusing on along the riverbank sides, dealing with problems such as giant knotweed, Himalayan knotweed, Himalayan balsam, and Japanese knotweed. The team work very, very closely with the farming community, and you can see groups here. They hold farming events where farmers can come along and learn from other farmers how they can better enhance, stabilize the banksides of the river, how they can work to keep livestock out of the river, and the different systems that are in place to enable them to contribute towards better water quality in the area and stop sediment runoff, etc. Second part of the program is about reconnecting people with the River Rye. It's about rediscovering the Rye, getting people out there and along the river, into the river environment to enjoy the river environment and really remember what it's like to be in nature. Rye Reflection is an art program, and this is about people reflecting on their experiences of the River Rye and how they've been inspired by the river, and to help other people become inspired by the river. There's a lot of citizen science going on. The river monitoring, the crayfish monitoring, these are all involved, and we get the public involved and volunteers involved in these programs. They're looking to improve the routes along the River Rye, to make it more accessible for everybody, to make the footpaths and the bridleways accessible to all. There's a very, very good schools program, the Upstream Downstream Schools program, which focuses on children from disadvantaged areas, from the Teesside area, maybe from some of the areas in Scarborough, to get these school kids out into the river catchments and to have a look and see what's happening in nature, to learn about nature. And then they have a ranger program, which involves young explorers and volunteers, which help to deliver the conservation tasks to the river. And then we need to tell the story of the River Rye. And there's, if you go to Sutton Bank, the National Park Centre at Sutton Bank and Danbury Lodge, you'll see stories of the River Rye in there. The Coastal Streams Restoration Programme focuses on water quality and farm works. And this programme works with landowners and farmers to deliver water quality improvements. They aim to reduce nutrients build-up, sediment pollution, increase water retention and filtration. They look to create riparian habitats and buffer strips, and to plant hedgerows and trees, and to look at different ways that we can improve farm infrastructure to stop pollution running off from the farm. The Blue Corridors project looks at in-channel obstacles to fish migration. And this project aims to increase fish migration and increase populations. It aims to improve hydromorphology and sediment transportation, and improve river habitat, gravel spawning grounds. And this year, the team is addressing a bridge with a bridge apron that's constricting the river channel. And this leads to significant pooling and sediment buildup in the river. They're also working on a culvert that's has obvious implications for migratory species. We have a woodland creation scheme, and this woodland creation scheme is funded through a Section 106 Woodsmith Mine agreement. Section 106 gives the National Park a sum of money every year to offset the carbon footprint of the mine works within the National Park. And their aim is to create pockets of mixed deciduous woodland, pockets over 1 hectare. And these can go from 1 hectare to several hundred hectares. And the end result is to have a woodland that has over 20% woodland canopy at maturity. And funding is available for up to 100% of the actual costs for capital works in the first year, and then there's a 5-year follow-up maintenance schedule. Other programs in the Conservation Department include the £250,000 Moor to Restore project, which aims to restore peatlands within the next decade by surveying the condition of the 4,500 hectares of degraded peatlands that lie throughout the North York Moors and to identify how to maintain them. The Birds on the Edge project is a £215,000 project to help save and restore 4 of the region's key bird species: the turtle dove, the yellowhammer, the song thrush, and the red star. And a lot of these programs work together, and we interact and we work as a team, as a larger team, to deliver these outcomes. The program I manage is called the Farming and Protected Landscapes program. So what's this program? This program is announced as part of the Agricultural Transition Plan, which initially run from 2021 to 2024 for this phase of the program. But it's been so successful that we've been extended for at least another year to 2025. It's a funding package to support farmers and protected landscapes, that's national parks and the areas of outstanding natural beauty, during the transition away from the current system of basic payments, which pays farmers for per hectare of agricultural land that they have, towards a move towards environmental land management, which focuses on the payment of public money for public goods. The programme focuses on the key challenges that face farmers, land managers and communities in these protected landscapes. And we're trying to get farmers and land managers to help us to address the climate and biodiversity crisis, to improve people's engagement with the landscape, and to support sustainable farm businesses and communities moving forward. The programme aims, so anyone applying for the programme, this is a programme unlike any other. Before, you would have a list of things that you could tick the boxes and say, I'll do this, and I'll do this. Now, this is more about getting farmers and land managers to think about how they're managing their land, to think about what it is they're delivering on the landscape, on their farm or in their estate, or even down to a small scale level of a couple of hectares. People can be more innovative in the way in which they think about delivering projects through this program. It doesn't have to be a tick box. We're prepared to listen to any ideas, and we're really interested in innovative projects. However, to meet the criteria, they must be delivering against one of these 4 outcomes: climate, nature, people, or place. And I'll talk about these in more details in a second. However, the projects must also demonstrate how they meet the Protected Landscapes Management Plan. Every protected landscape has a 25-year management plan, which lays down how that protected landscape is going to manage the landscape for the next foreseeable future. And our priorities within the North York Moors National Park are climate, nature, and health and well-being. The first year of our programme ran for 9 months. The programme didn't start until June 2021 and went on to March, end of March, 31st of March 2022. In this period, we spent £420,000 on projects, and this is what we were able to deliver. So we delivered 17 projects delivering for climate, and this included woodland creation, farmers moving towards a regenerative agriculture approach, projects to improve soil quality and reduce flood, and other projects linked with greenhouse gas reduction and slurry management and reduction of fire risk. 9 projects delivered for people, so 1 permissive path was supported, 7 projects to make the land more inclusive and more accessible to users, and 4 projects to support greater public engagement in land management. And these were volunteer projects. Excuse me. We delivered 20 projects delivering for nature. Hedgerow planting, positive management of triple SIs, habitat improvement for biodiversity, connectivity improvement, and 7 other projects with other nature outcomes such as water quality, etc. And then we had 21 projects delivering for place. So these were historic structures conserved and enhanced, including traditional buildings, traditional dry stone walls. projects increasing the resilience of nature-friendly farming businesses. So we did some work on farm business resilience and accounting, and how people can manage their accounts and understand their accounts better. And we've been able to do all this and deliver this through a range of partners. We've worked with over 200 farmers and land managers, and we've been, the local nature of the program has enabled us to engage with farmers who've not previously been in agri-environment schemes. So we're working very, very closely with an existing farming cluster, and that farming cluster had run out of funding and it was in danger of breaking up, and we were able to come in and make sure that cluster continues for the future. We have a local assessment panel which assesses every application over £5,000. That has representatives from Natural England, the CLA, Natural Farmers Union, local landowners, and the North Yorkshire County Council. And this map here just gives you an insight into the spread of our project. You can see we've got quite a wide spread across the national park. On that western side, not so many on that western side, because that's where Rye is, the Rye Vitalise project, and a lot of farmers will go to them. But across that thicker bit at the top there, where there are a lot of projects, that's the Esk Valley, and a lot of those projects have come about through word of mouth. So what do they have to do then? So to deliver for climate, they have to demonstrate that they're storing carbon and sequestering carbon, or they're reducing flood risk. They can be projects which enable better understanding amongst farmers, land managers, and the public as to what different habitats and land uses can deliver for carbon storage and reduced emissions. So this could be carbon audits and getting carbon audits of the farm so that the farmers know better how to manage their land. And then the final one there is the landscape needs to be more resilient to climate change. And this is an example here of a dairy farm resilience through slurry utilisation. We funded these slurry bags instead of an open slurry pit. So the farmer then has better management of that slurry. There's no emissions come from here, or the emissions are very, very carefully controlled. They separate the solid matter from liquid matter, which gives better nutrient management. We also installed rainwater harvesting kits, and we also give improved washdown facilities to make sure that there is less runoff and the yard is kept cleaner when cattle are moving. For nature, they need to deliver a greater area for wildlife, rich habitat, greater connectivity, manage their own habitats better for biodiversity, or increase biodiversity. And this here was a fantastic project where it was initially it was just a grassland, rough grassland, and we were able to support the creation of new wetland habitat, footpath improvements, and then create the conditions to allow cattle grazing. This project is working with the Woodland Creation, and we're putting in a 20-metre riparian zone along the river, the banks, the riverside at the bottom of the field there. For the people, they need to demonstrate that they're providing more opportunities for people to explore, enjoy, and understand the landscape, and that there are increased opportunities for more diverse audiences to explore, enjoy, and understand the landscape, and that there's greater public engagement in land management, for example, through volunteering. Here, this is an example of one up in Gothland, where we improved the ancient footpath. This footpath here, it's on a well signposted footpath around Gothland. It's commonly known as the Blue Bile Walk, but it wasn't really accessible for people on wheelchairs or people with sort of mobility difficulties. So we were able to improve that footpath so that more people can enjoy it. And then the farmer planted trees and putting wildflower meadows in to enhance that experience on the walk. And then finally, we have our project outcomes for place. And this is to improve the quality and character of the landscape, to restore historic features or conserve historic features, and then to increase the resilience of a nature-friendly farming sustainable business. In this project here, this is just one part of a much larger project on this farm. So this farm here, they came to us, they've done stuff for climate, so they've reduced their slurry production, they've covered their slurry, their muck store, they've covered their feeding area, and they're now looking at composting their muck rather than spreading it, and getting a much better nutrient management system going with their slurry. They've installed a frozen vending machine, so all the food is in there is their own locally produced meat, and that's butchered locally, and it's put in there. They can tell where the farm, where exactly which field the meat came from, and it's their own livestock that are on the farm there. And they've also improved their hedgerows. So that's it for me. Hopefully that's giving you a little bit of an insight into what we do in the national park towards nature-based solutions in the national park. So I'll just stop sharing my screen now. And hand over to Rob.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dave. And yeah, a really good introduction to all of the work that's going on across the North York Moors, and obviously this new sort of farming in protected area landscape program. Before I move on to some of the analysis that we've been doing around that, I just wanted to introduce myself. I spend most of my work is based in tropical countries like Kenya and Tanzania. And originally I very much focused, I guess this picture here sort of summarizes really my sort of research career has really been initially trained as a paleoecologist, so looking at long-term ecosystem histories. And over my sort of 20 to 30 years of working in science, I've, I guess, moved away from sort of looking down into sediments and back through time to looking up and forward, particularly on some of these sort of challenges that are coming down the line. And it's these challenges that this sort of farming protected area landscape program is really trying to tackle. And Dave mentioned things like carbon sequestration, around water course management, around ecosystem connectivity, ecosystem restoration, wetland restoration. And those future looking projects really need to be guided by appropriate models, and those appropriate models need to be guided by an appreciation of history and how people connect to that landscape. For the next slide. Yeah, as I mentioned, most of my work has been focused across tropical countries, but particularly sort of resonating with some of the issues that are going on in the North York Moors, around conflicts, around using land in a way to manage and to try and address some of these challenges, such as understanding carbon sequestration, such as understanding our future scenarios to create the landscapes we want, such as dealing with sort of natural capital or understanding our ecosystem services, be they pollinators or watersheds. And I think this work is very much driven by various sustainability agendas. The UK obviously will have to report on their progress towards achieving the sustainability goals, as will every other member of the United Nations. And obviously in the UK, we're also working towards the 25-year plan of DEFRA that again Dave mentioned as being one of the factors that are driving these initiatives, such as the Farming in Protected Area Landscape Programme. I think particularly we're connected into these SDGs of understanding life on land and how we can make choices about how land is managed. And so that those management interventions will have a positive benefit on climate and ultimately lead to sustainable development. Clearly, there are choices that we have to make about how we live, how we use the land, what type of future we would like to try and move towards. And often I know it's very challenging even dealing with the sort of present day and the realities of today or tomorrow without trying to sort of gaze towards sort of 2030 and beyond. But particularly, I think when we're looking at some of those tree planting initiatives that Dave mentioned, clearly, if you're planting a tree today, that tree is going to be in the landscape for, well, hopefully, for hundreds of years. So certainly having an eye on the future and thinking about how that landscape will evolve into the future, and ultimately to try and get ourselves on a pathway that can lead towards that sort of sustainability agenda is really important. And one of the things that I do within the University of York is sort of manage a research group. A lot of that research takes place around protected areas in different parts of the tropics. And often those challenges around protected areas really resonate very closely to some of the issues that Dave was talking about, particularly around relationships between farmers, around the communities, the appreciation of that landscape, the interaction between the grazers and the ecosystem engineers, and how some of these initiatives that are coming through, such as the Farming in Protected Area Landscape Programme, can be used for a positive change. Certainly, it's focused around this idea of nature-based solutions. So we know there are many, many challenges out there, and those challenges are becoming more acute, particularly around the sort of climate change agenda, the increasing variability in our climate, and often the consequences of that variability, such as increased flooding intensities. And the idea is that these nature-based solutions can provide mitigation to some of those challenges through this farming in protected area landscape and how that links into environmental land management. Dave clearly exemplified a number of projects and interventions which are focused around sort of climate change adaptation, around ecosystem-based management, around ecological engineering, around ecological restoration, restoring those wetlands so that they can store more carbon, draw carbon out of that atmosphere, and provide some sort of resilience to our landscapes. So in this project, what we did was really wanted to understand the nature-based solutions that are being supported through the Farming in Protected Area Landscapes Programme, how farmers were engaging into this nature-based solution narrative, and how those nature-based solutions could be classified, how they are being played out across the landscape, how they can be used to promote better use of our ecosystems, and also how they can be used to support the farmer. I mean, clearly a farmer has choices to be made about how their land is used, how it's managed, how they spend their time, and often those choices are made on commercial grounds. And clearly the farmer would need to be compensated if he is taking some land away from, say, grazing production or arable production into a sort of restoration type setting, such as increasing carbon store or increase in sort of pollution control along some of the river courses. So Dave mentioned this is a relatively new scheme, and I'm very pleased to hear it's been extended. For some of those who joined earlier on the conversation, you may also have heard that it's some of the financing around the scheme has also been increased, again, making it potentially more attractive for farmers to engage. And certainly there is a range of funding now available into the sort of nature, climate, people and place categories that Dave talked about. And it's not an insignificant amount of money, and it looks like it's going to be increased as that programme develops. And particularly important as we move away from those common agricultural policy payments into our environmental land management scheme type approach. So what we did, and this is very much work from one of our master's researchers, Louisiana, who's I think on the call, was look at the various projects which had been awarded through the North York Moors Authority via DEFRA, and then really try to understand how they play out across the landscape. As you can imagine, there's a lot of focus initially on tree planting and fence management, also boundary restoration, as well as some of those sort of feed and slurry management issues that Dave talked about earlier on with the rainwater harvesting and the big slurry bags. What we really did was wanted to understand how all of these projects could be classified and grouped as so-called archetypes of these projects. So what Louisiana did was take a whole series of surveys from the farmers, from their applications, and then classified the types of interventions that the farmers were doing across the North Yorkshire Moors using a type of analysis we call essentially it's a cluster analysis to understand these different archetypes. And we can see there are 4 broad clusters, and particularly fencing and tree planting was the majority of the project were focused around that, with very much resonance to carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation. And then less so on the water quality and the water monitoring, and even less on the sort of nature connectivity. But I would say that a lot of these projects which are focused around tree planting, around hedgerow restoration, obviously also connect into nature connectivity and have a cultural benefit as well. So these are all individual projects, and I'll just exemplify that last point with this one particular project, E3 here, which is again very much focused on fencing and tree planting, but as you can see has benefits to water quality, monitoring, and also a cultural value. I'm not going to go into this table in great detail, but that project there, you can see that it again has this sort of spiritual and symbolic appreciation of that landscape, of that woodland. So again, it's about identifying these sort of multiple wins that can take place. So yes, the program initially was focused on tree planting, carbon sequestration, links to climate change, but the benefits, those so-called co-benefits, also around nature appreciation and around opening up that space for people. Dave showed a map earlier on about how those sites cluster across the North York Moors, and what we can do now is take those that clustering that Louisiana has done in her project. Look at how those different clusters play out across the landscape and see where those connections are across the sort of fencing and tree planting, where the water interventions are. And this obviously is around what's it called, around Forge Valley. So clearly there's a project in that Forge Valley that was very much focused at mediating the flow coming down into the headwaters of the Derwent. Again, that raises quite a nice issue in that interventions that are taking place in these headwater catchments, such as along the headwaters of the Derwent, obviously then start to mitigate flooding. And obviously in York, I know we constantly are being flooded by the Ouse and the Derwent as the waters come down those catchments. Again, by managing the landscapes in those headwater areas, we're able to somehow mitigate and moderate the intensity of that flooding, so that there is downstream benefits as well as upstream benefits as well. Okay, so this is the last slide before we just pass it across to any questions, points of clarification that people would like in terms of where this work is going to go into the future. So clearly these projects, it's a relatively new scheme, projects have been funded, there's been some implementation. Certainly we would like to look at their the actual benefits that have accrued as a result of these investments, rather than just saying, well, getting the payment for carbon sequestration, monitoring and measuring the carbon that has been sequestered, so we can quantify that's the amount of carbon that has been drawn down, quantify those biodiversity gains through ongoing monitoring. So to really compare the investments that have been made through this program with impact. Understanding those the sort of spatial and temporal change and the directions of change is a really important issue. And we can extrapolate out from our sort of point-based maps that I was showing to understand the interactions at a finer grain size. I think certainly some of the work that we've been doing in other parts of the world have been around developing participatory scenarios. And again, Dave mentioned a lot of the sort of citizen science works going on along the Rye Valley. That participatory engagement with farmers, with communities, with school children, really important, so that we can integrate these types of approaches with understanding of what types of future people want to achieve. How it impacts on their livelihoods, how it impacts on hydrology, biodiversity. Clearly, there are lots of other factors in place, such as, it's not all about climate. Certainly there are issues around choices that farmers make, the societal change as we move away in certain locations from managing land for production, from managing land for a common good. And clearly there's a whole suite of training and dissemination which goes on around this work as well. And I guess this is part of that type of dissemination. Okay, so I think that's my last slide. I shall stop the sharing now and throw it open to the audience.
Rob, I just wanted to draw your attention to the Q&A. I think Alistair's asking a question. I know you did touch on it, but if you want to pull it up, I'm not sure if you can see it.
Yeah, Alistair's asking, it's excellent you're working with farmers to deliver such desirable goals. Can you say more about how you will measure success? The ultimate goals are things such as greater biodiversity, more carbon sequestration. Will you measure those, or will you use proxies such as more habitat, which, while desirable, of course, may or may not deliver exactly what you see? Thank you for that question, Alistair. The question of measuring success is always a difficult one, especially with these types of programs. I mean, this is a short program. It's a 4-year program, but we realize that we need to measure how we're delivering our outcomes, and we've tried to put things in place. Not all of these are, well, these are certainly not all asked of by DEFRA, but we feel that in the North York Moors National Park, we feel it's important to try and measure success. So with every hedge planting program that goes out there, every tree planting program, we're asking the farmers to send us an average measurement of every hedge plant that's planted, every tree that's planted, and then they have to give us an annual feedback of how that tree is progressing or not over the period of the program, with the last measurement coming in 2025. We can then have a look at that and see how much that tree or that hedge has grown within that period, and hopefully do some calculations to see how much carbon being sequestered. We're taking 2 master students on this year to look at. One is going to look at hedgerows, and we've got examples of a farm scheme which was run probably 15 years ago in the national park, and we still have connections with those farmers, so we can look at hedgerows that are 15 years on, and we have the dates when they were planted, and then he's going to look at comparisons to be what we're putting in now, and then try to scale that up using modelling to see, okay, he's going to measure the hedges at sort of 15 years and the hedges that we're going to now try and scale that up to look at model what could be potentially delivered there. He's also looking at and doing some measuring into biodiversity, and the other master students is looking more at well, I think they're going to look at carbon. We haven't quite decided what they're going to do yet, but they're looking in 2 different areas there. And then we've got a 3rd master student who's looking at the social aspect of the program, how our interaction and how what we're trying to do is increase the social capital and change the social capital within those communities from being a strong bonding capital, having strong bonding capital, to enhancing the amount of bridging capital by introducing the farmers to different people and different networking situations. We're also involved in 2 programs with Leeds University. One, which is Fix Our Food, which is we're working with Pippa Chapman and Ruth Dawson at Leeds University on the regenerative agriculture side of things. We've got a number of farmers who, through this program, have gone down through the regenerative agriculture approach. So I'm trying to engage with, link up Ruth with the farmers in our landscape, who have engaged in this regenerative agriculture approach to try and measure over the next 5 years what's happening in those projects. We've also got a program going with Ruth and Pippa, which is looking at grassland lays. So we've identified 10 farmers who are going to put aside 10 a hectare on each farm, and we're bringing in an agronomist, and we're going to look at seed mixes and how those seed mixes take. So with a lot of farmers who go down sort of AB8 sort of countryside stewardship seed mixes, they buy the seed mix in. That seed mix is a generic mix, and quite often you'll find that 1 or 2 species will become dominant within that mix, and you won't get the truly diverse sward that you're looking for. So we're bringing in agronomists to design swards specifically for the soil types and the area that they're in. And then Leeds University are going to take species measurements. They're going to do carbon measure, soil carbon measurements. They're going to take soil biota data, etc. And they're going to measure those plots over 5 years to see how those change and how the soil carbon changes. So we're finding different ways in which we can try and measure our success. It's not all easy. It's not easy, and we won't be able to do it all. But we feel that there's definitely a need to show that we're delivering these outcomes. And but saying that, I mean, there's a project called the Burren Project in Ireland, Southern Ireland, County Clare. I went to see that, and that's been running now for a number of years, and it was set up by a PhD student initially. And it's an outcome-based project, but they don't go around measuring species. They don't go around counting birds. They don't go around counting sort of insects, etc. What they do is they measure habitat condition. So is the farmer delivering the option? Are they managing the habitat in a certain way? And then they get scored on their habitat management. What they've found is if the habitat is getting managed in a certain way, and if a habitat is being created in a certain way, then those biodiversity benefits do come. So it's a bit of a mix of both for your question. I hope that answers your question.
Just to add to that, Dave, I mean, I think another sort of key measurement of success is people's behavior, isn't it? And how they engage in this space. And again, that's something which we've very much are capturing through some of our scenario work, in how people are willing to engage and think about how they are choosing to use land. How many people are engaging in this program? And like you say, it's started out only a couple of years ago, but it spreads quite quickly by word of mouth. Yeah. That it's a good thing to be part of, and so that idea of changing societal views on how land is used, how it's managed, how decisions are made, I think is also a key measure of a success of these types of schemes.
Yeah, and I think if we go back to that map that I put up, which showed quite a high percentage of our projects being in the Esk Valley, and now that came about initially because we have an Esk Valley facilitation group which has 40 farmers in there. We've been along to those meetings. We sit down, we have coffee with them, we talk, we visit their farms, we attend all of their meetings, and we engage with them and say, like, okay. And we're discussing, and we know that all farmers have got challenges, but there are significant challenges facing farmers at the moment with rising infrastructure costs, the cost of fertilizer, the cost of inputs, and the reductions in payments. As these BPS payments go down, farmers have to make changes. They will not survive if they don't change the way in which they do things. So they have to think about how they manage their land and how they can employ nature-based solutions to manage their land in a better way. The only way that they can make savings is to become more efficient and reduce their inputs. So they need to look at where they can cut the input costs. So does that mean changing your breed? Does that mean putting in legume mixes and herbal layers into your field so you don't need so much fertilizer? Is it changing your grazing regime to a mob grazing and paddock grazing system where you're using natural fertilizers rather than synthetic fertilizers? And there's loads of evidence there that just a change in grazing practice. We've got a number of farmers who've been doing this now for a few years, and from going towards a mob grazing, paddock grazing type system where they move the livestock every day on a 20-day rotation, they're producing 30% more grass now than they were when they were using fertilizer. So there are nature-based solutions out there, and just talking with farmers and taking them and introducing them to new people and then introducing them to new farmers, taking them to groundswell and to regenerative agriculture sort of shows and and introducing them to different ideas is definitely having an effect. And then they talk with each other, and so from there that spread to another area, Littlebeck, where one particular farmer in Littlebeck said, listen, we need to think about connectivity. We need to think about how we reintroduce all our hedgerows. It's beneficial to the livestock for shelter. I mean, as climate changes, they need shade in the summer, they need shelter in the winter. So they're reinstating these hedgerows and trees and bringing trees into the landscape is beneficial for production and health, animal welfare, as it is for nature. So the two work hand in hand, and it's just talking with farmers about this is really kind of
And that sort of word of mouth, I think, is really important, isn't it? And just, demonstrating good practice and benefits of being engaged in these things. I mean, this really resonates with a group that we work very closely with for the last 10 years around Mount Kenya, called TIST, T-I-S-T. And it's a tree planting scheme that's been going since the mid-80s. And, people engage as an individual householder or shamba or farm. They engage into this organization, they grow trees, and then they will get payment, relatively small payment, for carbon sequestered through the voluntary carbon markets. That started off, very much as a sort of individual focus, and it's just grown completely organically, but now engages hundreds of thousands of farmers across the landscape, all spread by word of mouth. That it's a good thing to be part of. There's another income stream that you can get from engaging in a tree growing scheme. And yes, we're sequestering carbon, but there are benefits in terms of conservation agriculture, in terms of soil management, in terms of crop production as a result of this sort of improved land management. So again, it's that sort of word of mouth approach, and I think that maybe sort of brings me onto that on the second question, which is in the chat about whether it's in North Africa or North Yorkshire or Africa. The politics really drives this. And there's a challenge around policy change, and I guess Elms has come as a result of leaving the European Union and the agricultural market, and it does require consistency, but it also requires, so I think there's an issue of consistency, and I think schemes like 25-year plan of DEFRA, provide some of that underlying consistency. Things like sustainability development goals focused on 2030 again provide some consistency. For me, working a lot on the African continent, the African Union's agenda for 2063. So they have a full series of agenda items where they want to move the continent, where they would like to see the continent in 43 years time. And it's those types of underlying things that provides a little bit of a longer term perspective. But also it's about demonstrating the benefits and demonstrating those benefits to the policymakers to provide the consistency. Again, just drawing on an example from one of the African countries, from Tanzania. For years, and this is probably going back about sort of 30, 40 years, there's been a lot of challenges around one particular biodiversity hotspot across Tanzania called the Eastern Arc Mountains. And there's hundreds of millions of pounds of conservation money being plowed into the Eastern Arc Mountains for conserving this beautiful forest, its rare and endemic plants and species. But it's not really had a great effect, and it's continually been nibbled away over the years. Through some of our work, we were able to demonstrate that the actual forest loss was equating to around about $8 billion. Straight away, that led to some political change, some new policies, and possibly a little bit of consistency about how that land is managed and how it's valued. So I think, as well as politics influencing what happened on the land, I think what happens on the land very much can influence policy and can influence those policy decisions.
If I can just add in,
yeah,
I think exactly what you're saying there about the political impact influencing land use. Farmers have been blamed for the condition of the land as it's in now, and for the destruction of habitat over years, or since the war. But at the end of the day, it's been policy that has driven that change. After the Second World War, there was a desire to produce food, and farmers were paid to produce food on a large scale, and it was based on, it was production focused payments. So the more you produced, the more money you got, and that drove the change in land use. It drove technology to bring in large scale harvesters and large scale equipment, which seen the hedgerows go, and which seen this kind of move towards fertilizer to produce more and more. So there was a lot of drive through policy to do this. But similarly, it is policy that's driving change now. And I mean, the UK has wanted to move away from the cap basic payment type approach for decades now, but they haven't been able to. They haven't been able to change that. And the changes coming now, and these changes will have an impact. They will have a social impact, and I think they will have a social and social, economic, and environmental impact. If you are not efficient, if you are not economically sufficient, self-sufficient, if you are not sustainable, then you will go out of business. And a lot of farmers and a lot of farmers are still in denial about this. They're still saying that they don't think that it will go that far, and they don't think it, but it will. And DEFRA are openly saying that there will be casualties of BPS removal, and we are seeing it now, and we're seeing a change in dynamics within the national park, with some farmers getting older, and they're thinking, right, I'm going to leave now because I'm not going to be able to do this. As tenant farms tenancies come to an end, then estates and landlords are taking those farms back in hand. Because the way in which land will be managed in the future is likely to change, and that's been driven by policy change. But I think now, as Rob says, with the 25-year plan and about drive towards net zero, that one of the problems in the past, and one of the problems is that you have a 5-year change. Every 5 years there can be a new government which decides new things and what their priorities are. But there is a definite desire, I think, and a cross-party desire to do something about climate change and to move forward. And the farmers that I speak to on a day-to-day basis realize that there is something that needs to be done about climate change. They can't have summers every year. Well, there's dry summers where there's droughts and they can't produce enough grass to feed the livestock. And when the land's too wet in the winter for anything to be done, if it carries on like that, then they won't be able to produce food. So there is a desire, I think, across several levels for a more sustainable approach to land management and land delivery. So I think yes, policy is a driver, but I think things that are driving policy and lobbying that's driving policy is also there, which will hopefully give a bit of consistency in this policy moving forward.
Dave, do you want to take the question from Katie? I know it just resonates very closely with the discussion we were having at the beginning of the session.
Yeah, so Katie's asking, is the scale of finance becoming available to farmers through these programs enough to make a difference to the bottom line? And will farmers in the North York Moors also receive subsidy payments through ELM and SFI? It can be a bit complex, this Katie. The program that we're running is because it's a temporary, it's a transitional program. And this is to set people up and to get them thinking about preparing their land to be able to access ELM and SFI in the future. So yes, the farmers who are involved in our program now will be able to access ELM and SFI going forward. There has been significant changes in the payments for countryside stewardship as of the 1st of January. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So hedgerow planting on the 31st of December was £11.60 a metre. On the 1st of January, it was £22.97 a metre. Standard parkland trees, so if you're going to put individual trees to create maybe a wood pasture, then the cost of those trees has gone up from sort of £24.50 to £123 per tree. So there is a significant change there, and there are significant changes in the revenue payments that farmers get as well. But will the payments that farmers get through ELM and SFI replace BPS? No, they won't. I don't think. No, they definitely won't. They definitely won't. And one of the things you've got to consider the farmers that are most at risk of BPS removal are upland livestock farmers, sheep farmers, and suckler cows herds. Dairy farmers not so much, but certainly upland suckler cow herds and sheep farmers are most at risk. And if you look at those farms there, those farmers are already, most of those farms are already in countryside stewardship. They're already accessing as much agri-environment payments as they can to support their business going forward. So yes, they will get an enhanced rate, and they will have access to SFI and countryside stewardship, and they may be able to access local nature recovery. Our countryside stewardship plus is local nature recovery. If they come together, they can access landscape payments. But will it replace BPS? The answer is no, it won't replace BPS. So they will get enhanced payments, but there also needs to be change. And there also needs to be change in the way in which they do things, in the way in which they manage the land going forward. I was on a really interesting webinar last night with Farmers Weekly. And one of the discussions on there was about if there are young farmers coming into farming now, what chance have they got of being sustainable and profitable going forward? And the answer is, and Farmers Weekly have data to support this, that young farmers coming in and taking over farms for the first time, young people coming into farming for the first time are far more profitable and far more sustainable than people who've been in it for generations. Because when they're coming into farming, they look at the land that they've got, they soil test their land, they check the swaths that they've got, they look at what they can grow and what they can produce on that land, and they select breeds and the right amount of breeds that are going to be suitable for the land in which they're growing. They look at what their input costs are, they think about what their output costs are, and they come up with a business plan of how they're going to do it. Because they often have to do that for the bank to get the money to buy the farm. And if they haven't got a sustainable business plan going forward, they ain't going into farming. So they do that. Whereas if you've got generational farming, generational farmers are on a farm, they tend to do it the way their fathers did it and the way their grandfathers did it. And their fathers and their grandfathers weren't sustainable and profitable without BPS. So there was a whole discussion on this Farmers Weekly resilience program webinar yesterday about, to become resilient, you need to think about change. You need to look at your grass, look at the type of grass you've got, look at your soils, look at how you can improve, look at how you can improve animal health and well-being. Maybe it's providing shelter belts, maybe it's doing different breeds. So there are loads of different ways, but I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, I just got distracted by another question coming in. There was one about habitat fragmentation.
Yeah.
I know you showed quite a few examples of sort of hedge planting and things. I mean, are you sort of really looking at connectivity nodes and looking at a broader plan on those?
Yeah, we're looking at when we're looking at hedgerows, they can't, if somebody comes to us and say, right, okay, we want to put a hedgerow in, we look at where they're putting that hedgerow in, and that hedgerow, they can't just put a hedgerow in an empty field which is going nowhere. You know, and so that hedgerow has to be either creating a new hedge, which is connecting two habitats. It has to be restoring a hedge and putting in traditional, what was a traditional hedgerow. And we think about how we can improve that connectivity. When we're thinking about funding hedgerows and woodland, then yeah, we think about where the fragmentation is happening and how we can better connect them. And an example of that is a woodland creation team are working on a woodland project on a farm out near Ravenscar on the coast. And it's very close to an ancient woodland that's already there. But the woodland creation people don't have funding for a hedgerow. So they've come to us and we've done a joint project. So they've connected they've created the two woodlands and we've put hedgerows in to connect those two woodlands together.
Yeah. I mean, it sort of resonates a little bit with some of the approaches that we take in Kenya. So we have a project at the moment that is looking at sort of elephant migratory connectivity, you know, how we can, you know, again, particularly, I guess, as the landscapes change, as new railways cut across the landscape and dissect it, as climates are changing, how can we maintain the connectivity across the landscape for large migratory species? So one of our Kenyan postdocs, Tobias Nyumba, is leading a project called Space for Giants, which is looking at that sort of broader landscape approach and understanding, you know, where those connectivity corridors are and what the challenges are around those. And that's a really important thing, particularly, I say, as the landscapes are changing so quickly and becoming more dissected.
We've just recently funded FERA to do a habitat assessment and landscape character assessment of the whole of the North York Moors National Park to identify where habitats are and what habitats are where and where those habitats could be better joined up. So we've got mapping, GIS mapping, to show us where we can deliver projects that can help make that.
Interesting. I did something similar about 30 years ago for the Countryside Commission. Yeah. Not on the North York Moors, I hasten to add.
Peter's just asking a question there. Are there any projects that the general public or students can take advantage, for example, through the citizen science projects? Yes, Peter, if you type in the North York Moors National Park, you'll come up with our webpage. And if you go on our webpage, there's a volunteer section on there. Let me just see where it is. If you just search for volunteers.
While you're looking for that, Dave, there's a question from somebody else came directly to me about, you know, how can you encourage farmers who don't adopt nature-based or sustainable practice, despite they can witness the benefits from their neighbours, they can see that it's their benefit, their neighbour is benefiting from, you know, engaging in a scheme such as this farming in protected area landscape work, but they're still, you know, not willing to change their ways. Do you have any experience on those sort of entrenched views and how those how schemes like this can maybe influence some of those entrenched views?
sorry, Rob, but were you talking to me there? I was looking for something else there.
No, it was a question that came to me about, so even farmers that see that there's a good thing to be involved in, they see that there are benefits, but they still are not willing to change their traditional practices.
Oh yeah.
And any words of advice that you have in terms of getting people on board in?
I mean, I think there are people who won't change, and but I think a lot of the people who won't change won't be here in a few years' time, because they will have to change. And I mean, I'll give you a prime example of a farmer I know who was brought up in a traditional farming household, Swaledale sheep in North Yorkshire Dales. They have about 800 acres, and they were running about 800 to 1,000 sheep, Swaledales. When he took over the farm from his father, the first thing he did was the books, and realized he was making no money whatsoever from the sheep. So he cut out all the sheep and cut down from 800 to 1,000 to 200, and introduced belted galloways, changed the whole practice of the farm. Nothing is kept indoors anymore. He uses no fertilizer. He's put hay meadows. He's restored hay meadows on all of the land. He can't put trees and hedgerows in because he's on a limestone pavement. Within a year, he'd made a difference of £12,000 to his bottom line. He saw the farm break even, and then start to go into profit. He has literally no input costs whatsoever, high biodiversity on the farm. However, there is a carbon footprint in his farm, and the change meant his carbon footprint. If you look at it from a carbon footprint, his direct emissions dropped massively. His indirect emissions, his enteric fermentation emissions rose because he keeps cattle for 40. They rise per kilogram of dead meat. So his per kilogram of beef produced, his emissions rise and rose quite significantly. But then you have to take that into the greater perspective, in that the biodiversity and the biodiversity net gain on that farm is tremendous. So if you were to and that's why I think you can't just look at farming on one level. You can't just look at it per farm. You need to look at a larger scale. But as a result of, I was doing a social capital study of farmers and how they network. And I went to see him and I asked him how his network had changed as a result of moving towards this high nature value farming approach, and how the change in farming practice had impacted on his network. And his partner turned around and said, massively, nobody talks to him anymore.
Oh dear.
Because he doesn't do Swaledales.
Yeah.
And he's been ostracized by the whole farming community in the area because he does something different.
Yeah.
We do Swaledales in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And trying to break that down is very, very difficult.
So we have exactly this, again, this is what I really enjoy about this type of work, is the parallels with our Kenyan examples. So we have the same things going on with transitions of traditional pastoralists, Maasai pastoralists, because again, with occurring droughts and lack of grazing, pastoral life is really, really challenging and getting increasingly challenged. So there's a lot of people moving into farming, moving into sectorization, and there are traditionalists and there's the sort of innovators, and often those innovators are ostracized by their communities.
Without a doubt. And I was interviewing a sheep farmer in Wales, and we were talking about incomers coming into the community. Now incomers are taking over, and incomers are running the parish council, and incomers are doing this, and incomers are doing that. I said, well, are you on the parish council? He said, no. I said, well, why don't you apply for the parish council? I ain't got time for that, have I? It's just, right.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
just, and it's just this kind of, yeah. I mean, I think the facilitation groups, we're trying to work with facilitation groups. And if you can get them, if you can get people to come to farmer events and you get farmers talking and they see farmers, and that's what's happened in Fry Updale. So a couple of farmers have done things and they've got connectivity and they've started doing things, and then they talk. They talk at the market. They go down Russet Market and they're talking and they're saying, "See, you put some new hedgerows in. Where'd you get that money from?" Then? And then yeah, the next thing you know, I've got somebody on the phone to me saying, "Dave, can I put in some hedgerows?" And I'm like, "Okay." And we've now got 2 or 3 farms. So that now in one dale, we've got 16 farms delivering FIPL projects, and they all came individually. They didn't come as a cohort of 16 farmers.
Yeah,
they came individually, but they're all side by side. And there's large areas of the beck being fenced off. There's connectivity being improvements going in. There's water quality improvements, and all going on through that. If I can just answer Peter's question. Yeah, if you go onto the North York Moors National Park website, and if you go onto the page that says looking after, scroll down there, you'll see volunteering. And when you click on there, it gives you a whole list of type of volunteering opportunities that you can go. And it's got Revitalise in there. And if you click on Revitalise, it will tell who you can speak to get involved with citizen science.
Fantastic. I can see the numbers are starting to drop off a little bit, Dave.
Yeah.
And we've gone 20 minutes over at this late hour. So I think we should probably, and I know I can smell my tea is over ready. So
yeah, I think mine is as well.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the audience for really interesting questions, really interesting discussion. Thanks a lot, Dave. And of course, Louisiana for your work. And yeah, let's keep that conversation going, because I think there's some really interesting issues here that we're just starting to scratch the surface of. So,
yep.
Good.
Keep in touch. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Have a good weekend, everyone.